Okay. Hello everyone, I'm Paweł. I'm the CTO of Entitle, a blockchain-based startup, and I'm here to talk about a little bit about blockchain and a little bit about how we plan to give you back control of your digital assets. So first and foremost, what do you think? Who really envisioned blockchain when it was created? What are the dates? Who made it possible? 2009. Right, so that's correct. Before then, there were like scientific papers describing the solution, but I actually found that in 2003 there was this game. Doesn't work. It doesn't. Yeah. So there was the game called Command and Conquer Generals, when apparently you can mine money using the factories. So I guess Nakamoto was a gamer, at least for a part. Right, so it doesn't work. Yeah, it's cool.
Paweł support for this technical issue.
Mogę ci przełączyć, jeśli chcesz, tylko mi pokazuj.
Dobra, to spróbujesz. All right, cool. So first and foremost, what's really blockchain? So blockchain is a immutable, decentralized ledger where actors are hidden and transactions are in plain sight. It supports virtually any value. So basically, it's based on transfer of assets. You can understand an asset as a tangible, physical, or virtual thing that you own and you can transfer. And blockchain enables you to do so seamlessly. So what's the main benefit of using blockchain? It's decentralization, where yeah, and that's the pause. yeah, it's okay. Yeah. So what it means that blockchain is decentralized means that there's a lack of form of governance around your transactions. No one can influence them, no one can alter them. Only two parties that can interact with each other. It also provides a proof. It also basically fixes the problem of ownership and governance. So it's also immutable. So any transaction that goes on the ledger cannot be altered in any ways unless you take the most of the network and rewrite the chain. Blockchain is also about incentives, so you can reflect your ownership of your asset on the blockchain using tokens and create microeconomies that interact with each other. How a simple transaction works? Basically, two parties request a transaction between each other. If you want to transfer money from your wallet to your friend, the system puts the transaction into a block with other pending transactions, and it broadcasts it to a peer-to-peer network where it gets verified. So it's not like anyone can put his transactions on the blockchain. He needs to go through a consensus mechanism where the majority of the network needs to agree on the network state. So basically, blockchain supports two consensus mechanisms. I mean, there are many more, but the two mechanisms are the most common one. It's proof of work and proof of stake. Proof of work is basically about crunching numbers in order to, and competing with other network participants in order to put the transactions into the block and append it on the blockchain. It's extremely resource hungry, and because of that, it also centralized the network a little bit. The other ways to reach consensus about the network state is proof of stake, which is basically about depositing money on the blockchain and vouching for the contents on the block appended on it with your deposit, which also isn't really a perfect way to do the consensus, because it's just survival of the wealthiest, and they can agree what's written or what's not on the network. So this really curious thing I found. So it's the state of the Bitcoin network from today, all reachable nodes over 11,000. And I have a question to you. What happens when, for example, satellites go down and I'm going to cut the cable right in the middle? Anyone knows?
The end of the world.
Yeah, that's cool. That's not it, but that's cool. So basically, network speed happens.
So,
And
excuse me, is there the satellite running?
no, just ignore the satellite parts. We are living in a...
Well, actually, there is this project with satellites.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, just assuming that there are no satellites and the internet is just going through the cables, right? And you have one Bitcoin network around the world. What happens when you cut the cable? Yeah, that's correct, but what happens after? Yeah, so yeah, think about it. Basically, in the context which network wins after the thing goes back, because it's really important what transactions are persistent and what really aren't.
The longest chain is going to survive.
What does it mean, the longest chain, in terms of proof of work?
Chain with the most loss already.
Yeah, the most work proven, like the most work mined, right? Yeah, but that's correct. Ivana, can we hire this person? Right, so why blockchain 2.0? Basically, in my opinion, blockchain 2.0, ignoring 3.0, which is on the rise, is because of the smart contracts, which are basically piece of code deployed on the blockchain. They are immutable. Once deployed, it cannot be altered unless you deploy a new one and provide some kind of upgrade path to it. It's a pretty revolutionary and simple concept at the same time, because it just creates a decentralized agreement where you don't need the middleman to perform an action of any kind. For example, get married or buy a house. It's all code driven. Apparently, it has also disadvantages because programmers are making mistakes. So whenever you deploy an invalid contract, it can have like tremendous consequences. Like on health, you can lose all the money bound in this contract if you trade assets. Yeah, so, all right. Okay, this crashed. Right, so this is the evolution that's currently happening, at least in the, what was correct, I'm not seeing this correctly. So the internet is moving forward from text to images to videos to music it just keeps progressing. The same happens with blockchain. It moves from money to contracts to assets to computation to everything that can be spread across the network and is basically transactional bound. Right, so now I'd like to talk a little bit about the digital asset and ownership as well, because it's a hidden problem that just goes afloat and becomes to be visible. What it means that you own a thing. For example, when you buy a book from Amazon, does it mean that you own the book, ignoring the fact that physically, yeah, you own it, but when you buy a digital book, does that mean it's yours? Do you have any constraints on things you buy that way? Yeah, so basically you cannot trade anything you buy because it's, in example of Amazon, it's DRM bound, so your book is tied to a Kindle account and I don't think you can do anything with it, so it supports only one-time buy from the vendor. And this basically generates trouble in the digital space because you earn hard money, everyone just works, gives best from themselves, and they don't really own things. Besides subscription-based platforms when you just stream the content and you are done. So what's behind Entitled? The idea was born like 6 months ago, more or less. And we aim to give you back the ownership of your digital assets. We aim to basically disable the intermediaries that are needed for you to to buy an asset, to transfer it from one way to another. And we started from games. So yeah, this funny picture depicts the current situation, what's happening if you are, for example, an indie developer. So any game devs here on the sale? Yeah, that's cool. You are a Unity guy or? Yeah, no, Unity guy, just a random game dev. That's cool as well. Right, so basically, if you make a game, either in team or just by yourself, you are bound to your publisher, and it goes even deeper. You are bound to a way to this conundrum: how I can publish the game, or how I can make it work and earn the most money out of it. And you are tied to two platforms that have monopoly currently on the market. The one platform is Steam. And the second is GOG. Obviously there are others, but these are the main players. And yeah, so Steam is basically this big bad robot that we are trying to undermine a little bit with your model. The thing is, when you publish the game on Steam, the first layer it needs to go through is basically it needs to be green-lighted, so unless you have a strong publisher behind your back, you need to get your game voted by the community, and then it has a chance to exist on the platform. So it revolves around the costs of publishing your game. So the Steam model currently supports, basically requires you to resign from 30% of your income. That goes to the platform because they are supporting your game, and everyone can just download it from the platform and play it and gamify it. It's great, and the other thing that Steam does really bad is that once you, for example, acquire your game, you can't resell it in any way. I have like 300 games in my repository. I can't do anything to them, so I can't resell them or move them to other markets. Right. Right. So this picture depicts basically the distribution of the shifting movement from physical to digital. Basically, in the context of games, everything is almost everything is being stored on the digital medias, like digital marketplace stores, and the physicality of a game is slowly disappearing from the market. So it's one of the reasons that Entitled focuses on games to leverage it's basically to get into the digital distribution market. So Entitled is actually a blockchain-bound licensing solution where you can publish your game or your asset and define a complex licensing configuration schemes for it. So you don't pay any fees to the platform owners because it's all driven by smart contracts. And one of the simplest models of persisting and handling licenses on chain is basically the registrar model, where you store the IDs on the blockchain and provide a proof of ownership in that way. In that particular scenario, when you want to purchase a license for a game, the software seller basically registers the license on chain and transfers the license to the user. And then basically your application is, which is also blockchain bound, it validates the license off chain and checks either you are entitled to your game or you aren't. What's interesting in this model that Entitled wants to release to the public is that also enables secondary market for your assets. So not only you can sell the game on the primary market, going from that developer to a user, you can also resell the asset if the developer wishes you to do so. So it's all configurable by the asset creator. So how you can actually make this this happen? So this is an example of an interface written in Solidity. It's completely enough to support the first model. These are just three functions that allow you to create your asset on chain, acquire the license during transaction, and for the producer or the content creator to actually refund the license if there's any requirement to do so. So this interface actually decouples the previous model a little bit, because as you can see here, these are all licenses handled on chain, and this interface introduced an asset which is completely decoupled abstraction from a license. So we can model a structure of an asset just providing these basic fields where we link an asset to the content producer or the content creator, and we basically set variables like licensing terms, how the license derived from this asset should behave. Like, for example, we can set primary and secondary distribution ratios, which are key value mappings, declaring who gets which cut from the revenue. For example, during the first sale from when developer sells the game to the gamer, he can decide that he gets either a 5% cut, 90% cut, and 0 cut, and this will happen during the actual trade. It also supports more complex scenarios, like a developer and a publisher, and basically an outsourcing studio or an influencer even. So all of these guys are getting a cut and can participate in the revenue of the asset of the game that's circulating on the market. From a pure logical perspective, other variables can, again, this is just an example of a typical on-chain license implementation. So other variables are basically a supply, where you point to how many assets you want to sell, and the price on the primary and secondary markets, and whether you can actually acquire the game from the primary market. So it's whether you can actually buy it. Yeah. So for example, as a content producer, I just want to have a proof of ownership. I don't want to sell anything never to no one. So I'm just publishing the license on chain, persisting in an immutable state, and that's it. So we can actually also support refunds, reselling of the game, alteration of the price of the secondary market. So for example, I want to publish an asset in this example of mine, a game, and I want to enable the guy who buys my game to change the price whenever he wants to resell it. So it's completely doable. So other stuff is pretty standard and persistent on chain, like creation date of the asset, and the variant from which the license is being derived from, the metadata, which can link, for example, to the actual physical file hosted on the interplanetary file system, IPFS, for example. So going a little bit deeper into this model, this is just a simple abstraction of a license which is derived from an asset doing a transaction. It links to our actual assets and has this two interesting flags that the buyer can override. So, for example, when a user buys when a gamer buys from a developer its game and it's secondary market ready, he can decide when it's ready for another resale, and he can also decide if the price will be changed or not. So in general, I think it's pretty important to have blockchain enabling your control completely of what you own, and that you can decide what you can sell and to whom, and who gets a cut or who doesn't. It works in a pretty decentralized way. So there is no middleman, no intermediary that influences your trade or your transaction or your actions on the blockchain. I think it's important that you are basically entitled to things you create, and this is the mission we are trying to achieve. So basically, our white paper lands in a couple of days from now. This example is just one of the simplest examples we have, and you are extrapolating on the models, making them more advanced, introducing more complex licensing schemes. So the plan is for this model to be available for developers and blockchain-bound entities entirely for free. We are going to deploy this to the mainnet and allow people to create their own licensing scenarios based on the asset they want to publish. Right, so this is basically an empowerment that we are aiming for in terms of developer in the context of developer and games. So again, we are starting from games, but the models and solutions we are going to present are domain agnostic. So we have a lot of ideas and actual implementations in place that support enterprise software, which is absolutely hard to support in terms of licensing. It's just one huge mess to control. Even Google has a problem to license their solutions. We are also at the start we are also aiming for releasing the stuff using Ethereum, which is a public blockchain completely suitable for our needs. It has advanced capabilities of smart contracts, which is not always the case in other blockchains. But the models are blockchain agnostic, so it can work for corporations in permission blockchains and basically allow them to grow as well with us. Right, thank you.